Thanks very much, Steve. Thanks for that introduction. You notice how he didn't press record until he had finished. So you might be on the recording with your questions. I'm going to be on the recording anyway. So it's really good to be here. I am the Methodist Liaison Officer in Jerusalem, and I'll explain what the Methodist Liaison Office does. But just to explain why I'm in the Isle of Man and not Jerusalem. You probably know the reason, but I had booked a flight back to the UK on February the 27th, Friday, February the 27th, because I was coming back to celebrate a significant birthday with my family and friends. And I'd ummed and ahed when I was booking that flight a few months before. Should I fly on the Friday? Should I fly on the Saturday? I booked for Friday, and as things were happening in the region and we were all wondering what was going to happen, we were all fairly certain what was going to happen at some point. And I thought to myself in that week, I'm fairly confident I'll get home on the Friday, because America will always attack once the Dow Jones Index has shut for the weekend. So I thought Friday I'm going to be all right, and I'm not sure. And sure enough, I woke up the next morning to the news that Israel and America had attacked Iran. And so pretty soon my return flight was cancelled, and basically I am back here. I'm based in London, but I'm back in London until the Foreign Office travel advice changes and I can get back to Jerusalem. So of course, in many ways, thankful not to be dodging missiles in Jerusalem, but my heart is with the people I know and love and work with who are having to do that. I did leave Steve there, and he had to find his way home, and that's a story that I'm sure he will tell you. So we can have the next slide, Steve, and what I'd like to do this evening actually is I'll talk a little bit about the Methodist Liaison Office, but then actually I want us to. I could talk for hours about the situation in Israel, in Palestine, and the wider Middle East, and you don't want that. But what I'm going to ask, and I'll give you prior notice now, is maybe if we get some questions. After I've talked about the Methodist Liaison Office, have some questions. Those questions you've always wanted to ask. Don't think that any question is silly or stupid. I know a lot of people say it's a really complex situation, and sometimes they think my question is simple. Please, I can guarantee if you're thinking of that question, someone else is thinking of that question as well. Be bold enough to ask, because I'll give you a complicated answer, and it will make you sound more intelligent. But no, seriously, it'd be good for you to ask the question so we can have that sort of conversation, rather than me just give you a talk for however long. And then I think that hopefully will be a bit more useful, and we can. What time are we finishing, by the way, Steve?
Whenever people want.
Okay.
There is tea and coffee afterwards to carry on informal conversations afterwards. By 9:30. If we're having tea and coffee from 9, finish by 9:30.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. We don't have to go that long. And just the other thing to say, that first slide, it did have my email address on. If you want to be in touch with me after this, please do email me. I can give you a card if you haven't had a chance to take it down. Because I also know that some people, process stuff very differently at different speed. And I'm the sort of person that goes to a meeting and I sit there, and by the time I've caught up with everybody talking, and then I go home and I go, oh, that would have been a really good point if I'd have thought of it in the meeting. So if you're a bit like me and process slowly, then feel free to be in touch. I'm more than happy to talk. Okay, so Methodist Liaison Office, Jerusalem. That church tower there is the Cathedral Bell Tower of St. George's Cathedral, Jerusalem. And this actually is a view from my flat window, because I actually live at St. George's in Jerusalem, and the Methodist Liaison Office is right underneath. I quite literally live over the shop, but I'm always the last in the office. So what do we do? Well, the Methodist Liaison Office is a joint venture between the British Methodist Church the American Methodist Church, and the World Methodist Council. And we should have a team of 3 people in the office. There should always be a British Methodist minister, an American Methodist minister, and we have a local office manager. At the moment, it's just the local office manager and myself. The Americans, there was someone there until May last year, and then she left and they've not replaced her. And of course, I'm not there now. So basically, the only person in country is our office manager. World Methodist Council represents 86 million Methodists across the globe. So I have great fun telling the heads of churches in Jerusalem that I am the representative of 86 million Christians across the globe. I still don't get invited to the parties though. So one of the things we do is work ecumenically, and I need to say now that the Methodist Church does not have a church in the Holy Land. So I'm a minister without a congregation. And we're not there to set one up either. We're not planting a church, I'm not tending a flock, but we are there and we work ecumenically. And so I am actually officially an ecumenical associate of the Church of Scotland in Jerusalem at St. Andrews, but I also work closely with English-speaking congregations across Jerusalem and in the West Bank. And so it's about being a Methodist, being one of those 86 million Methodists in Jerusalem. We work in an interfaith way wherever possible. And you can imagine, I'm sure, that that's not the easiest thing to do in Jerusalem. And many times I go to interfaith meetings, and depending where it's held, will depend which faiths are actually represented in the room. Because if you held the meeting in the West Bank, Israelis are told that their life is in danger if they go into a Palestinian town in the West Bank. There's big red signs that say, Israelis not allowed, your life is in danger. There are those Israelis that do go into the West Bank, and there are those Israelis who will ignore that. But if you held something in the West Bank, then you won't get a Jewish representation. And then for some Christians and for some Muslims, if you hold it even in Jerusalem, they will not be able to, they haven't got the permits, Israel don't give them the permits to travel from the West Bank to Jerusalem. So it really does sort of depend on where you have it as to who's there. So it's not very satisfactory. You know, we can use Zoom and we do that. But wherever possible, we work interfaith. We work with pilgrim groups. I am not a tour guide. I don't stand in Nativity Square and hold up my umbrella and say, Jesus was born over there, Joseph parked the donkey over there, and Mary, you know, no, I don't do that. I'm not a tour guide. But if Methodist groups come and they've organised a pilgrimage with a pilgrim tour operator or whatever, they often, if they tell us they're coming, I'll say, I'll tell you what, why don't I come to your hotel for an evening, and you know, you're doing the holy sites, you're doing the you know, those sort of religious stones of your pilgrimage, and I'll talk a little bit about the living stones of Christianity in the region today, because there are Christians. There are Christians in Palestine, there are Christians in Israel. The numbers are falling, but they are there. And if I've got a good relationship with the groups that come, I might say, add a day or two on to your pilgrimage, and we'll do some day trips to visit communities. Because actually, I really believe that if you're going to do a pilgrimage, yes, you can walk in the footsteps of Jesus, but we need to understand the land as it is now as well. And in some ways, it's not that different from the time of Jesus. It was an occupied land. People were oppressed. So when Jesus stands there and you know, looks at the scroll of the prophet Isaiah and says, you know, I've come to set the oppressed free, he was saying that to the people that were oppressed. So, you know, we can make sense of a lot of the teaching of Jesus in the modern day as well. There are various projects that we support across the land. I've put some of them here. WIAM is the Palestinian Mediation Centre that works with Palestinian communities and practices mediation, as well as supporting local communities through youth work and kids work and and supporting whatever needs there are. Hope School is a Christian school in Bet Jala, which is part of the Bethlehem municipality, often known as a second chance school because they take those children that have been thrown out of the other schools and they take them in, and they have marvellous results. And they'll take the kids whose parents actually can't afford to pay for their education, and they don't mind that. They carry on and they get good results. Tent of Nations, which is a Christian family who live southwest of Bethlehem. Their land is surrounded by illegal settlements, Israeli illegal settlements, and their land has been under threat of being taken from them, even though they are legal owners, and they have deeds from the Ottoman Empire, they have deeds from the British Mandate, but their land, they've been in court for the past 30 years, and it's getting worse. But we support them. We send volunteers there. We sent Steve there, and volunteers go and they help farm the land, but they're also a presence, an international presence that helps the family maintain the land. We go and do communion there once a month, things like that. Four Homes of Mercy is in Bethany, and it's a home for people with disabilities, and it's a wonderful project. It tends the sort of thing that gets forgotten because it's not to do with the occupation, it's not to do with the situation in Israel and Palestine, but actually it's to do with a real great need. And sometimes these people that are in the Four Homes of Mercy, their families quite often sort of have forgotten about them, and so it does great work. Princess Basma Centre is on the Mount of Olives, and it's a children's centre, does some great work with families and children, and also set up a satellite service in October 2023 in Gaza, just as the war struck. And so we've supported them through that as well. And DSPR, which is the Department of Service for Palestinian Refugees, and they do a lot of work in Gaza. And before October the 7th, 2023, we used to support the work they do. They did with young people, but since 23, we've been just helping them to offer initial healthcare in Gaza, and they've done that for the last 2.5 years. There's other organisations we work with. We offer volunteering opportunities, so if anyone wants to come, you're very welcome. But we offer opportunities to volunteer with some of these projects, and it's a chance, not just, some people come for the pilgrimage, but it's also a chance just to live in the region and volunteer in the region. You get a different feel for the region when you do that. We work alongside anybody that's working for human rights in the region, whether that be Israeli, Palestinian, international, whether it's Muslim, Jewish or Christian or whatever. Anybody that is working for a just peace, we will work alongside, build up a relationship with, and support and encourage and do what we can together. Part of my role is to do things like this when I'm back in the UK and talk about the situation, but also if the Methodist Church wants to speak out on Israel-Palestine, then they'll either ask me to write a statement, which someone else changes, or they'll send me a statement that someone's written and I'll change it, and they may not accept my changes. But that's part of why I'm there, is because I live there, and I can bring that understanding into the statements we make as a church. One of the things that we've started doing is organising solidarity visits, and I think this is really, really important, and I think this is what we're going to do much more in the future, and that's basically having groups that come, not to do the pilgrimage, but come and to meet communities and groups that are working for a different scenario in the land. And Steve talked about the fact he visited twice and he experienced something of that, and we go to some of those groups we work with, the human rights groups, or we go to some of those communities like the Tent of Nations or other Christian communities or Muslim communities or Jewish communities who are seeking to offer a different way of seeing things. And it's really, really important. And it's really important for the people that you come and stand alongside. Because the reality is, certainly amongst our Christian brothers and sisters, they feel really neglected by the rest of the Christian church. And so one of the things we can do, if we bring people to listen to their stories, and not only to listen, but to go back and tell their stories, it helps them. They really feel like someone is listening and someone is standing in solidarity with them. So basically, we are a Methodist presence in the Holy Land. And we're a presence not because we've got a church, as I've said before. We are just a presence of a church that says we are committed to the Holy Land, but we are committed to a just peace in the Holy Land. And, you know, it's not a cheap thing for the Methodist Church to do. You know, it's a thing that's not going to produce a church and new members, but it's actually a commitment to say that the Holy Land is important because, of course, it's where Jesus walked, but it's also important because it is a land that has been in conflict for so much of its history, but the recent history is very much also because of the British. And we can talk more about that if you want to ask questions about it later. So we have a real sort of commitment. And I think sometimes we're able to highlight things. One of the things I've become really aware of coming back and being here now is what I see on the news is not what my colleagues are telling me. You know, it's not the people that I talk to back in the Holy Land are telling me something very different to what I see on the news. And I know that happens. And so to be able to highlight some of the things that are happening and perhaps see different levels of the conflict or the occupation or the injustice, whatever you want to call it. So for instance, I didn't put on here, but one of our partners is the Bethlehem Bible College. And they have a society, Shepherd Society, which works from the Bible College, which is what it says on the tin, a Bible college. You can go there and do a theological degree, etc. But the Shepherd Society is about helping the communities in Bethlehem. And if you know anything about Palestinian community, you will know that actually, if someone in your family, and when I say family, I don't mean a child or maybe even just a cousin, I mean a seventh cousin twice removed, that's still your family. If they are in need, you help them. And if you don't, it's an embarrassment on your family, and you don't want that to happen. When October the 7th happened, immediately Israel closed down the West Bank. Absolutely closed it down. So I was living in the municipality of Bethlehem on October the 7th, 2023. After sort of getting my head round that missiles had been exploding over the top of my flat, I went out because I thought, I'm going to need to go to the shop because, being a man, I didn't have a lot in. and so if I was not going to be able to get out much, I was going to go. So I got out, and the end of my road, there was concrete blocks across the end of my road by the afternoon of October the 7th. When I left the West Bank during the week that followed, I had to get to a checkpoint, not to a checkpoint, to just a mound of concrete at one road in one taxi. And I booked another taxi to come from Jerusalem to pick me up. And I had to walk over this mound of stones and everything with my suitcase and get in this other taxi to get to Jerusalem. Now I could do that because I had a British passport, so if I got stopped by the soldiers, then they would let me do that because of my British passport. People in the West Bank couldn't. And what happened was also those people, so no one could get into the West Bank, and Bethlehem relies on tourism. The biggest part of the economy is tourism. So immediately there was no tourists. And then the other biggest part of the economy is those people who live in Bethlehem who work in Jerusalem. But Israel give them a permit to travel from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. It's only a matter of miles. It's not that far. And immediately, on the 7th of October, they just cancelled all those permits. So what you got was, you got you got about 70% of people in Bethlehem immediately unemployed. And of course, the knock-on effect was poverty. And we saw the numbers of families sort of dipping below the poverty line just increase week after week after week. And so they couldn't look after each other because they couldn't look after themselves. There was no way. And so Shepherd Society started delivering food parcels, started cooking food and getting people to come and doing all those sorts of things. And actually we were able to support them, we were able to find a bit of money to help them with that as well. But also it just, I think, having that knowledge, it gives you a different side. You know, there are the big issues, and we can talk about the big issues around occupation and injustice and violence and all the rest of it. But for, you know, individuals, communities who just suddenly were thrown into poverty, it's another side of things. So having this local knowledge, having these, you know, being there, just being a presence. And, you know, it sounds rather grand, but we talk about, you know, we talk about incarnation in our Christian faith. You know, God was incarnate in Jesus. God came to earth and dwelt amongst us. But there's something very powerful about a ministry that does that. And a ministry that you know, I'm not saying I'm Jesus. I really am not saying that. And I'm not preaching like Jesus, and I'm not doing any miracles. But just to stand alongside and be present, to be incarnate in the land. And that's part of my frustration for being here now. And I know people tell me I'm silly, but actually it is a frustration because I really believe in this ministry. Okay, I'm going to stop talking about the Methodist Liaison Office. How about having 2 or 3 minutes, chat with one another, turn around if you don't like the people you've ended up sat next to, or you know what they think, and just have a quick chat and just think through some questions that you might like to ask, and then we'll open it up to ask those questions and we'll have that conversation. Okay? I'm not going to time it. Just when the level gets quite high, I'll stop it. Okay, you've got a choice now. If you want to carry on talking amongst yourselves and not bother with me, that's fine. I'll just go and drink a cup of tea. But if not, we'll have some questions. What I'm going to suggest, if this is okay with you, please, to ask you a question, if you could come up and use this microphone. There's 2 reasons for that. One, everybody will hear it, the question. And secondly, it will also get nicely on the video. So it saves me trying to remember, well, it saves me remembering your questions. That's what it saves me doing. So if that's okay, if you could come up and use the mic to ask the question. So is there anyone that, is there any questions come out of that conversation? Anyone brave enough to go first? Okay, well, we've got 2 at the back, so we'll take this one and then we'll come to you 2 at the back.
Dave, you mentioned that news sources over here are unreliable. I'm assuming that includes BBC Verify, etc. So, are there any news sources that we can, you know, think, yes, that's believable, ones we should be reading or watching?
Thank you. Thank you. You can sit down because it will be a very long answer. No, it won't. Okay. I think just to clarify what I said, I think what we hear here isn't necessarily wrong. It's just not necessarily the whole picture. And we have to admit that every news outlet has an agenda. And they choose what they share and they choose what stories that they do. Now, I think it's really important to use stuff that is verified, if that's BBC Verify or whatever. I think that's really, really important, because of course the other thing is, and this is what I'm struggling with, I see a lot of things on social media, and so during the first week I heard a story that there had been a missile that hit Jerusalem. Now, I had some of that backed up because I have a lot of friends in Jerusalem, and I get alerts on my phone every time there's sirens, so I'm aware. And you know, I was messaging saying, you know, how is it? And one of my colleagues, who's never run in his life, said to me, it's the first time I've run to get to the bunker because things were exploding around. Now, I saw nothing of that on our news. Now, the other side of it was that I started looking and I saw this picture of this big crater. And I'm going, I know I don't know every inch of Jerusalem, but the story I've heard, I don't recognise where that is. And actually, as I did more digging, it turned out that it was a picture of a crater from somewhere nearer Tel Aviv than Jerusalem. But someone had put it on social media saying, oh, missile hit in Jerusalem. So I think verify is really important, and that we should also do a bit of our own verification. In terms of the news agencies, I think the key thing is to, if you've got the time, go wide. But also perhaps go to places that you might not think of going. So I'll say to you now, watch Al Jazeera. Yeah? It's good journalism. It's a very different agenda than you'll see in this country, but it is good journalism. So watch that, as well as your BBC, your Channel 4. And can I just at this point say, GB News is not a news channel. It's actually licensed as an entertainment channel. So I'm just saying that, I'm putting it out there. I would also, there are other places, there's a really good website called Plus972, plus972.com. Plus972 is the international dialing code for Israel. That's, if you forget 972, just look that up. It's actually Israeli and Palestinian journalists working together. And they do a lot of really interesting articles and looking at what's happening, but going deeply into it, and going into it from the point of view of Israelis and Palestinians trying to source the truth. So it's a really good place to go. And if you sign up, they'll send you, they'll send you emails to tell you about, things, special reports, etc. So I would recommend that. The other thing to say about news is Israel are banning journalists from reporting on strikes in Israel. Now, some people say to me, well, that always happens in wartime, and it's all about actually, not giving away your secrets or whatever to your enemy. But we need to be aware of that we might not be getting the whole truth, because actually Israel's not allowing their own journalists to report on what is happening. So it's going to be one of those things where maybe a bit later, hopefully sooner than later, when this particular conflict ends in the Middle East, but we might not know the absolute truth. So I'd say go wide if you've got time to do it. Make sure you do verify stuff. Be careful what you see on social media. It's very easy to, and this is how social media works. You see something and it chimes with your view of what's going on. You go, oh yes, but make sure you check it out. But look at things like Al Jazeera and Plus972 that are actually coming from the region with an agenda that is different to the news that we get in the UK. We had a couple of questions at the back. Were they two separate questions?
I think so.
Yeah, no, that's fine, that's fine.
You mentioned at the beginning of your talk that there were Christians in Israel, that there are Christians in Palestine, but that their numbers were dwindling. Is that because of the troubles there, or is there another reason?
Thank you. Yeah, it's an important question. Thank you for asking. There's a few reasons why it's happening. But the first thing I want to say is I know Palestinian Christians better than I know Israeli Christians, so I will talk a lot about Palestinian Christians. Let's remember that these are families that actually were around at the time of Jesus Christ. What you don't want to say if you meet a Palestinian Christian is, when did you convert? Yeah? They converted at Pentecost, and they will tell you that their ancestors, however many generations, were at Pentecost, and they're proud. They're proud. If you go to Bet Sahor, the shepherds' fields, they will tell you, our ancestors were the shepherds. Okay, so there's been a long tradition of Christians being in the Holy Land, right back to Jesus. And they will tell you, we are the ones, we were the messengers, we were the ones that first heard the message, we accepted it, and yes, we were converted then, but our families have been Christians for a long time. Why are the numbers dwindling? It is partly because, certainly looking at the conflict and the oppression and the occupation we're seeing now, since 1948, there has been a determined attempt to rid the land of as many Palestinians as possible. Palestinian Christians, on the whole, have tended to have better education, better jobs, therefore more money and more opportunity to actually leave. I mean, that's a very blanket, and it's not true for everybody, but so there has been more opportunity for those Christians to leave. And certainly if you talk to the pastors in the West Bank, since October the 7th, they will tell you that families have left because in many ways what they have seen in Gaza and what they are seeing in the West Bank, because again, this gets back to news as well. For 2 years we were focused on Gaza, and the situation in the West Bank was getting worse and worse and worse. Now everyone's concentrating on Iran. Gaza's still being bombed. Gaza is still being starved. And the West Bank is still suffering from settler violence and from IDF violence. And so for many people, and it's a horrible choice to make, and I've known some people in the Holy Land for 20 odd years, because I've been travelling there for 20, 21 years. I've seen grown Palestinian men cry when you talk about their children who have left. So it's not an easy decision for them to make. And they cry because they want, no Palestinian wants to leave the land, because that's admitting defeat. But yet also no Palestinian wants their children to suffer either. On the other hand, there is a friend of mine who is a Palestinian Christian who said, when I say to him, what's your hope? He says that my teenage daughters get to America and stay there. And he's very clear about that, because he doesn't want his children to go through what he's lived through. So it is something about the occupation, the oppression. It is something about what has happened, especially since October the 7th, when we've seen a speeding up of things in the West Bank that are making life for Palestinians almost intolerable. And it's the fact that so many Christians have an opportunity to leave. The Christian pastors are really, really worried. I think the Christian community is less than 1% of the land now. I think if I'm right, at one point it was about 10%. And people really believe that we will just have museums, religious museums, Christian museums in the Holy Land with no living stones, with no living Christians. And so I think it's really important to see that, to understand it. There is a sense also that actually Christians, you get mixed messages. You get mixed messages about Christians. So, you know, you hear stories that they get persecuted by the Muslims. You hear stories that they get persecuted by the Jews. On one level, all Palestinians will call themselves Palestinians first. They won't say I'm a Palestinian Christian or a Palestinian Muslim, I'm a Palestinian. That's their identity. And that's partly because they want to be able to keep that identity. And you get the propaganda that says, of course, Christians are welcome in Israel because, you know, this is, you know, it's your holy land as well as our holy land, etc. But you're beginning to see systematic oppression from the Israeli regime. So churches who before had an agreement that they didn't pay certain taxes are now being asked to pay those taxes, but being asked to backdate it. Thousands of shekels. We're seeing land under threat where churches are. And so there is a threat from the state of Israel as well. And then the other thing to say about Christians is, of course, what we're seeing outside is the growth of Christian nationalism, which very often is mixed up with Christian Zionism. And Christian Zionism, which is rife in America and is rife in this regime that is currently running America, is a theology that says we need to get the Jews back to Jerusalem, because once they're back in Jerusalem, Jesus will return, and then we'll all be taken into heaven with Jesus. Now, I mean, it's not biblical. It's only about 300 years old. It's a theology that has grown up and as far as I'm concerned, has no place. It shouldn't even be called a theology. Not simply for the reason that what they're saying is we're going to support Israel so that they take over Jerusalem. And then when Jesus returns, well, you know, they won't go to heaven because they're Jews, because they don't believe in Jesus Christ. And how, and interestingly, Israelis just go, yeah, we know this. Yeah, and it's a stupid thing, but we get the support of the Christian Zionists, so we will live with it because it won't come true. And so for some Christians, when they see supposedly members of the same body of Christ actually supporting the occupation and oppression of themselves, that becomes too much as well. So yeah, it's a very worrying time for Christians, and many pastors are saying 5-10 years we will not have Christian communities. Do you have I was going to say, do you have a question that's a bit lighter, but we're talking about Israel and Palestine, so.
You made a comment earlier on that Britain had a role to play in this from sort of way back. Being the age that I am, I'm shocked to discover that we haven't been the good guys.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to put up the settler colonialism? Okay, so yeah, I mentioned that Britain had something to do with the current situation. Let me tell you something first. If you're in Palestine and you introduce yourself to someone and they say, where are you from? And you say Britain, They're probably going to say one word to you. Can anyone guess what that word is? Rude. Balfour. Balfour. And then they'll say, hi, great to meet you. Why don't you come to my house? I'll make you some mint tea. So, why did I say we have a lot to do with this? Well, pre the First World War, British foreign policy was such that one of its aims was to end the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire had been around for hundreds of years. It was crumbling anyway. Its time had come, but Britain very much wanted to get rid of it. And part of the Ottoman Empire was this place we call Palestine. And the Palestinians have lived under Ottoman rule for hundreds of years. And so this strip of land here, which is a shape that we're well aware of now because we see it on lots of maps, sort of before 1917 was considered to be sort of Palestine within the Ottoman Empire. Of course, this strip of land also, if you want to go back to biblical times, is part of, and I emphasize the word part of, Judea and Samaria. Okay? And I might, if I remember, come back to why I've said it's only part of it. Okay? So, sorry, Steve, sorry. The other thing that we've happening, and I'll get to why the Brits have got a problem, but the other thing we have happening at the end of the 1800s is a growth in what became known as Zionism. And so you start getting a Jewish political theory that says we need to have a homeland. And that's built out of the massive oppression that Jews experienced, especially in Eastern Europe, but in our country as well, in the UK, and of course, ultimately comes to a head in the horrendous Holocaust of the Second World War. And so Zionism starts to build as a political theory, initially as a secular political theory. So most rabbis were going, no. Look, God will give us the land when God's ready to give us the land. That changed. There are still some parts of Judaism who say, no, God will decide, we shouldn't do anything about it. But you've got this growth of Zionism. And as we get to 1917, Britain start to take on the Ottoman forces in Palestine with the idea of liberating Palestine and Jerusalem. Now, they've made 3 promises. Behind the scenes, the Brits and the French have divided up the Middle East in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And Syria and around there, sort of the French get, we get Palestine, etc. So that's been agreed. Then they approach Palestinians, they approach Arabs in the Ottoman Empire, and they say to them, tell you what, you fight with us against the Ottoman Empire, and you can choose what land you have in this part of the world. And then we get the very famous one, the Balfour, what's called the Balfour Agreement. And Lord Balfour was the Foreign Secretary in the British government at the time, and he wrote a very short letter to Lord Rothschild stating that the British would provide a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. Now, you can't make those 3 promises and come out with a solution at the end. But that's what we did. And so in 1917, eventually, it takes the Brits about a year to do it, but they liberate, in their terms, they liberate this strip of land. And Allenby marches into Jerusalem, and it becomes under British rule, and what we call the British Mandate. So it goes from being ruled by the Ottomans to being ruled by the Brits. And here we've got yellow, we've just got yellow, and that's representing Palestine, okay? In this map, this represents Palestine. So the next map, we kind of see, it says 1946, don't worry too much about that. But basically what happens during that British Mandate is that, especially sort of after the First World War and leading up to the Second World War, there's a lot of Jewish people who realise what's going on, and they leave the places where they're in danger, like Germany and all the other places, and they start moving. Some of them, I mean, lots of them moved elsewhere, but some of them move to Palestine, and you can see some green bits emerging on the map. And this land is generally bought by what is known as the Jewish National Fund, which is a fund that is donated to by many different Jewish families and communities, and they start buying the land. And they're living in these communities, and they're living alongside the Palestinians. And you can talk to people who tell you there was a time, because there were Jews living there before as well, but they'll tell you the times when Palestinians and Jews lived together. They used to celebrate each other's festivals, or they babysit for the children while other people went and did their festivals. And they talk about that. And, you know, you've kind of got that, but as you get post-Second World War, of course, the world has seen the horrendous Holocaust. And you get boatloads of Jewish people turning up, saying, you know, you didn't liberate us very early on. You know, we need somewhere. And so you get a big influx after the Second World War, and you have the Brits trying to contain this situation, where you've got Palestinians who've been living there for hundreds, thousands of years, and you've got this influx of Jewish people. And what happens is the Brits find it really hard to contain. And there is, you know, we're fighting against Jewish gangs, we're fighting against Palestinians and Jews, Palestinians. And eventually the Brits kind of go, do you know what? We're out of here. And they say to the United Nations, draw up a partition, because we're going to leave in 48. And so what happens is the UN partition plan of 1947 is here. So what you can see, we've got a lot more green, a lot less yellow. In fact, the green is 52% of the land, the yellow is 48%. So the Palestinians weren't best pleased, but they weren't even getting half the land. And you see also 3 distinct areas of Palestine. Now, you know, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but who thought that this would be a good idea? Well, apparently, the UN Special Commission that drew this up said that the more borders there were, the better cooperation there would be between neighbours. As I said, hindsight's a wonderful thing. So this goes to the UN. Palestine is not officially recognised as a state, doesn't have a seat on the UN, so it doesn't get a vote. But they're against it. Other Arab countries around are against it. The Jewish Zionist movement say, yes, thank you very much. We'll have that. So the UN vote for it, and they say, yeah. And 1948, 14th of May, the Brits have left. The state of Israel is declared, and Palestinians do not declare themselves to be a state because they did not agree with this partition. People say it's a mistake, people say it's a really big political mistake, but they weren't going to agree to something and say, in effect, say no to it, but then say yes by saying yes will become a state. What happens, of course, is immediately there is a war, and the other Arab countries and the new state of Israel go to war. And what happens is that after that war, this is what the map looks like. Now, 1948, Israel celebrates it as the birth of their nation, or the modern state of Israel. 1948 is called the Nakba by Palestinians, which means catastrophe. And interestingly, Palestinians don't talk about that in the past tense because it's ongoing. But what's happened is the state of Israel has taken much more land. The bit up north, totally gone.
I've never been to the Holy Land. I'm totally ignorant of the situation except for what I'm fed by the media, okay? So I'm an outsider looking in and asking a very hot political question. How much do the Palestinian people recognise Hamas? And for that matter, how much do the Lebanese recognise Hezbollah? Because to me, what's happened on October the 7th was not Palestinian people marching and doing what they did, that was Hamas. Thank you.
No, thank you for the question, and you're right. You're absolutely right to answer it, to ask it. You can answer it as well if you want. So I think it's a little bit simpler with Hezbollah and Lebanon. You know, Hezbollah are not in power in any way at all in Lebanon, but they are there, and I'll tell you now. You'll go back to the news when you get home tonight to know that Hezbollah have launched a lot of rockets at northern Israel. And they did that last week as well. So Hezbollah is a force, but it's not, it's not had any governmental power. It operates as a, whatever you want to call it, a terrorist organisation, a military organisation, whatever, regardless of the Lebanese government. Hamas is a little different because, of course, Hamas was elected to govern Gaza. And I think we need to, I don't want to make this distinction too wide, but, you know, within the Hamas movement in Gaza, there were politicians, there were civil servants, and there was the military wing. Now, I don't know enough about the organisation to know how much those three actually talk to each other. And sometimes people try and make the analogy of the IRA and Sinn Féin, you know. Of course, there are some people who support Hamas, but not, Palestinians. But I'll also tell you a story. I was in Gaza in October 22, so almost exactly 1 year before October the 7th, 2003. And I met a young guy, and he said to me, I'm a journalist. And I said, oh, who do you write for? And he said, well, anybody that'll listen. And I said, okay. I said, I'll listen. I said, I'll not get you published. And so we met, and we sat in this hotel, and we were sat at a table, and he said, before I start, we're going to have to move. And I said, okay. And we moved right to the other side of the restaurant. And I said to him, why have we moved? And he said, I don't know who those people are over there. And if they're working with or for or a part of Hamas, I don't want them to hear what I'm about to tell you. So there's a lot of people in Gaza who were not in favour of Hamas. In the West Bank, which I know better because I've spent far more time in the West Bank, there is some support, but on the whole, there is very little. But having said that, there's very little support for the Palestinian Authority, for Fatah, in the West Bank as well. So in many ways, Palestinians feel betrayed by their leaders. When October the 7th happened, people were just like, what? They knew that Israel were going to come down hard. And all they said to me was, we just hope that something happens in terms of the world. But of course it didn't, and we saw, what happened. So, it's like any political organisation or any military organisation, there are those that will support it. My worry is, you know, Netanyahu said at the beginning of the war in Gaza, or on Gaza, he said, I've got two objectives. We're going to get the hostages out and we're going to flatten Hamas, we're going to destroy Hamas. Well, you couldn't do those two things. I mean, anybody with any sense would know you can't do those two things. But also, there is some evidence to prove that the bombardment and the genocide in Gaza has just increased the ranks of military Hamas in Gaza. Because those people, especially young people who have not seen any political will to sort this out during their lifetime, are just going, we might as well fight and die than remain here. So I actually think there are, you know, however many people they think they killed in Hamas, you know, the deaths of all those other civilians and children and all the rest of it will have just created more people. And in the West Bank, there are a generation of young people who are feeling the same. We have no hope. You know, we're 20 years old, we've not seen a peace process. All we've seen is our life get harder and harder and harder. And there are some, they're not affiliating to Hamas. They're just creating their own little militia and, you know, increasing the violence. I think it's a miracle that the West Bank has not erupted into a bloodbath. And long may that be the case. And that's down to a lot of Palestinians who believe in non-violent resistance. But I'm not sure how long it will last.
What you've just said about how long will it last leads me into this next question. We've seen Palestine go from lots of yellow, for want of a better expression, to very little yellow. Where's it going to end? In 20, 30 years' time, will there be any Palestinian people? Will that state exist? If it ever became a state?
Thank you, thank you. It reminds me, I said earlier about Judea and Samaria, so thank you for that question. I'll try and talk about that. Will Palestine exist as a state? Does it exist as a state? It is recognised by a considerable number of the world's countries as a state now. Not quite enough to give it automatic statehood and a place on the United Nations. But a few years ago, it became an observer at the United Nations because more countries recognised it. And so last year we had a flurry of states, including the UK, that said, yes, we recognise Palestine as a state. That wasn't really your question, but I'm just using the time to think of the answer. Okay, so Netanyahu's party have made no secret of the fact that they believe that, and I'm going to use this phrase, from the river to the sea, that is Israel. And I use that phrase because they use it in their manifesto. Of course, over here we go, oh, you can't say it because it means that we're going to obliterate Israel. But actually, the Likud party have used it to say that that's what they're aiming for. They are aiming for that land to be theirs. At the moment in the government, you have people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir who have said there will never be a Palestinian state. And what they've said is, you've got three choices if you're a Palestinian. You can leave, you can stay and live under our rule, or you can fight us and we'll kill you. That's the choice that they're giving. So for many Israelis, there is this understanding, and I think the way in which October the 7th has been used and memorialised has shifted a lot of moderate or left-wing Israelis. They've shifted a bit more right. You know, anecdotally, I can tell you stories of people that I knew who 20 years ago were saying, yes, we can find a way to live with Palestinians, it's no problem, we can have a border, it'll be okay, it'll be fine, who are now saying, no, we can't. We've got to sort out the problem. So, for many, They want the land. They passed a law in the Knesset saying you're not allowed to use the phrase West Bank anymore. And they've changed the wording of old laws. You ever read 1984? If you haven't, read it, because it's happening now. So they talk about Judea and Samaria, and that is the land. They talk the biblical land. Now, if you know your Bible, and this is why I said Palestine was only part of it, Judea and Samaria goes past the Jordan, past the limits of the land now. So the question is, how much are they actually seriously talking about Judea and Samaria? Are they going to take the other side of the Jordan? Where else are they going to go? And so where will it finish? I think for many, it finishes with either the Palestinians leaving, getting killed, or just saying we give up and we'll become second-class citizens in the state of Israel. Now, it doesn't have to end there, but that's the way it's going. I said we haven't had any sort of peace talks for the last however many years, and we haven't. But there is a movement that's talking about a one-state solution, and that is coming from both Israelis and Palestinians. And traditionally we talk about the two-state solution and the lines that were agreed, and we'd have Palestine and we'd have Israel. But actually people now are saying, do you know what? What if we had a one state? What if we had a state where just everybody had the same equal rights as everybody else? And I've heard Palestinians say, you can call it what you like, as long as I have the same rights as the person next to me who used to be called an Israeli or whatever. Now, there's a lot of problems with that, and there's a lot of things to be given up by a lot of sides. But actually, it might be the one way in which there could possibly be a solution. But there has got to be, I think, pressure from international governments, not to say you've got to have a two-state solution. On October the 8th, suddenly Britain was saying, well, we've always believed in the two-state solution, that's what it's got to be. Well, you hadn't worked for it for 40 odd years. And suddenly you say it now. The time's passed, it won't happen. But actually, what our government should be saying is, we'll get people in a room, we'll get Israelis and Palestinians together. We will listen to them with equality, and the international community should mediate that so that that happens. And so that things like right of return doesn't get pushed to the end. And actually sit Israelis and Palestinians down and go, okay, what is the solution? Because then you'll get a solution built from the two communities, not dictated. Britain dictated. The United Nations dictated. Look where it was. Actually, let's get the two people together on an equal, level playing field and find out what they want to do in terms of a solution. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. Of course it's not easy. But actually, it's got to be the only way to get to a solution. Otherwise, it will be those people who have the dominant force, and that is Israel, backed by America, and they will get their way because they will force it on Palestinians. Everyone's going, I need a cup of tea. Has anyone else got a question just before? I'm not saying we have to. Phil.
Many thanks, Dave. It's been absolutely fascinating, riveting, and until your final comments there, I was looking for hope. You see the map turning ever greener, and you see the West Bank camps being gradually dismantled. And I'm just wondering, what do you think we can do as individuals, in terms of maybe supporting the liaison office, maybe supporting different projects there who are bringing Israelis and
So I think yeah, there's a lot we can do. So in terms of the Methodist Liaison Office, we have a newsletter. Well, we do when we get around to writing it anyway. You won't be bombarded with a newsletter if you want to sign up. On the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays, we have a Zoom meeting for 40 minutes at 6 o'clock. And we get somebody to speak, somebody from some of those organisations I've been talking about. So in the last couple of weeks, we had a rabbi who is part of an organisation called Roots, which is an organisation that is based on Palestinian land in the West Bank. He's a rabbi, he works with a Palestinian, and they bring communities together, and he works with settlers and tries to help settlers understand, you know, what it means to live on Palestinian land, etc., etc. So he's been on. We've had people, we've had a journalist who worked for English-speaking Al Jazeera, who is in Gaza and has survived the 2.5 years, and she's been and told us some of her experiences. So we meet for 40 minutes, we let them speak for about 25, then we go into sort of breakout groups. Some people pray, some people discuss what they've heard, whatever, but that's something. And if people are interested, if you give me your email address, then you'll get an email with the link to the Zoom. If you want to come, I know now is not the time, but you know, when somebody steps in and bangs their heads together of the belligerent leaders that we have, and we get some sort of end to this conflict, you know, and when the Foreign Office says we can travel, then come on a solidarity visit. Talk to Steve. You know, Steve's been. He knows the sort of thing that we can offer. And I would say, a lot of people ask me this. They say, do I ever feel unsafe? I don't actually feel unsafe. I mean, yeah, I've been there with missiles and everything, and that feels a little bit unsafe. But day to day, when missiles aren't being flung at each other, you know, one of the key things is, and I've said it already, my phone buzzes all the time with what's going on. So if there's a settler attack somewhere in the West Bank, I know immediately. So if we were planning to go there, we wouldn't go there, we'd go somewhere else. So we can keep people safe and secure. Yes, there is a risk because obviously it is a conflict zone, but actually coming and standing alongside people that are living there means so much. It's not for everyone, I know that. So don't feel guilty if you're going, no, I couldn't do it. But if some people might want to do it. In terms of other things, obviously, let's continue praying. You know, after October the 7th, I was going around a lot of churches in the UK, and people would say to me, well, we haven't prayed for Gaza. You know, and I'm thinking, how can a church not pray for Gaza? You know, we should be praying for Iran, we should be praying for America, we should be praying for Israel, we should be praying for all the other Gulf states that have been affected by this. We should constantly pray. And we should make sure we do that and hold the people that lead our prayers to account if it doesn't happen, because we need to do that. In terms, talk to our politicians. You know, we need to put pressure on our politicians. The attack on Iran, whatever you think of Iran as a regime, and it's not a good regime, it was an illegal attack. So let's hold people to account. Iran were negotiating. Okay, they might have been dragging their feet, but that's what happens in negotiations. Yeah? There was no threat from Iran. Iran were never going to attack Israel or America. So let's hold our politicians to account for that. Ask them to use their influence. You know, there is a BDS movement, boycott, divestment and sanctions movement. You know, economic boycotts are one way of a non-violent way of actually putting pressure on a country. If you want to, in your own life, boycott certain Israeli goods, there's a couple of apps. One's called Boycat. The other is called No Thanks. Very simple to use. Barcode scanner if you're in whatever shop you're in and you want to just check. And that, you know, but I would always say if you're going to boycott, then write to the company and tell them why you're boycotting. Because you know, that's when we start to have an influence. So we can do that. I would also say that on the one hand, if we are people of faith, then let's meet with other people of faith. Now, I don't know what faith communities you have on the Isle of Man, and you can tell me afterwards, okay? But actually, and let's not fall into the propaganda that is around. You know, I speak to people and they tell me, oh, Muslims want to take over the world. They want to take over our country. I speak to other people and they say, oh, well, the Jews run the world and they are all, you know, let's challenge those things. So let's, yes, be critical of Israeli policy because it's wrong. But also, let's recognize that, you know, Jewish people and Muslim people, you know, they, at the heart of their faith, is the same as the heart of our faith. First time I went to Palestine, they were building the separation barrier. We haven't even talked about the wall. They were building it, and I've got a picture, and I have it on my desk, just on the wall by my desk in Jerusalem. And someone had written, "O Muslim, O Jew, O Christian, your God teaches you to love one another," which is true. It's there, you know, in all those faiths. So let's be positive about interfaith stuff. I think we talked about news and finding things out. Let's be informed about what's going on and keep reading, keep looking, and have conversations with other people. There are people who say that what's happening now in the Middle East is going to shape our world for decades. And I think they're probably true. And it is partly built on the occupation of the Palestinians. And so it's a mightily important issue for our world today. What America and Israel have got away with, Putin's going to say, yeah, I'll do that. China are being very quiet. When are they going to say, well, do you know what? Taiwan really is ours. You know, never mind North Korea and all the other places. These are the important things. This is why international humanitarian law is really important. And so let's challenge our governments to uphold international humanitarian law. We put it in place because of where the world got to. We put it in place to protect civilians. We put it in place to protect countries. I hate the fact we have laws about how we fight wars. I don't want to fight wars at all. And the longer I'm in Jerusalem, the more a pacifist I actually am, because I see that violence does not get us anywhere except with more violence. But if we're going to have wars, then we have laws that say how we fight them. And those laws have been consistently broken. So we need to be able to reclaim that. So we need to be a movement that says to our people, our leaders, they are there for a reason. Okay, they might need tweaking. The United Nations maybe need tweaking. Yes, but we went through too much in the Second World War and in the First World War to actually allow this system to be broken. Sorry, I'm getting carried away. But yeah, please pray, act, support those people you know, and don't give up hope. I know it's easy to, especially when I answer a question, say, there won't be a Palestine, there won't be Palestinians. But I always hold on to, and we talked about this as we were coming in, in our lifetime, apartheid ended. The Berlin Wall fell down, we saw so much change. Northern Ireland. I know it's not perfect in Northern Ireland, but it's a lot better than it was. And, principalities and powers do not last. But goodness, righteousness, and love do. And my friends in Palestine who live under this occupation, not like me, who can wave my British passport and leave whenever I want to, they say It's not so much that we have hope, but we have faith. And that faith, if we live it out in love, will bring hope.
Well, just want to say, express a huge depth of gratitude to David for allowing me to spend time with him twice over these last few months, but for him spending time with us all here this evening. So let's just give a mark of our appreciation. I'm going to leave that slide up there on the screen, not least because it contains David's email address if you want to jot it down, but also because of the message that's there on the wall at the Tent of Nations, one of those projects that David mentioned at the start of his presentation. We also have a box at the back if anyone wishes to make a donation. This is where we show not only our respect but also our trust in David. Because I asked him earlier, I said, where should donations go? You know, how can we best support those who are working for peace and justice in the region? One of the big difficulties that particularly Palestinian organisations have is the banks make it incredibly difficult for them to receive international donations at the moment. So any donations that you make this evening, going to pass to David. He will be able to make sure that they get to places where they will be put to best use in the causes of peace, justice and well-being for all in the region today. David, thank you again. The call to pray was very evident there, and one of the encounters that I was privileged to have was with somebody who long has been a spiritual hero of mine, Father Elias Shakur in Ibelin. Google him, look him up. One of the most amazing men that I was privileged to meet while we were out there. And I remember his words, one of the things that he said was that peace is not a dream never to be achieved. Peace is the result of justice. Simple as that. There's no peace without justice. But when there is true justice, there will be peace. And so before we go through for tea and coffee, and please do stay if you're able and share casual conversation together, David will be around. Keep having conversation with David as well. Before we do, I sometimes find words hard to find when you're trying to pray for situations as difficult and as complex as we've heard about tonight. So I'm going to use some words that's found in one of the hymns in our Methodist hymn book. If you wish to, feel free to close your eyes or to look at the image on the screen and echo this prayer in your hearts. We pray for peace, but not the easy peace built on complacency and not the truth of God. We pray for real peace, the peace God's love alone can seal. We pray for peace, but not the cruel peace, leaving God's poor bereft and dying in distress. We pray for real peace, enriching all the human race. We pray for peace, not the evil peace, defending unjust laws and nursing prejudice, but for the real peace of justice, mercy, truth, and love. We pray for peace, Holy Communion with Christ, our risen Lord, and every living thing, God's will fulfilled on earth, and all creation reconciled. We pray for peace. And for the sake of peace, look to the risen Christ, who gives the grace we need to serve the cause of peace and make our own self-sacrifice. So God, give us peace. If you withdraw your love, there is no peace for us, nor any hope of it. With you to lead us on, through death or tumult,